My name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Friday, January 5th, and it is the 91st day since October 7th. Yesterday, the Washington Post published a piece that was called "Israeli Calls for Gaza's Ethnic Cleansing Are Only Getting Louder." And the chief economist, the article starts and talks about the chief economist for the United Nations World Food Program, talking about how he's seen all kinds of conflicts and crises, but in his life, he's never seen anything in terms of this type of severity, scale, and the speed, how rapidly it's happened. In 91 days, we've seen more than 20,000 deaths in Gaza. The article goes on and talks about the human misery unfolding there, the little sympathy in Israeli public discourse, where the priority remains the vanquishing of Hamas. And, the article continues. Members of Netanyahu's right-wing coalition have called for the dropping of a nuclear bomb on the densely populated Gaza and the total annihilation of the territory as a mark of retribution, and the immiseration of its people to the point to where they have no choice but to abandon their homeland. This week alone, a parliamentarian from Netanyahu's Likud party went on television and said it was clear to most Israelis that all the Gazans need to be destroyed. And then Israel's ambassador to Britain told local radio that there was no other solution for her country than to level every school, every mosque, and every second house in Gaza to degrade Hamas's military infrastructure. Meanwhile, prominent Israelis, including former lawmakers, top scientists, and intellectuals, wrote a letter Wednesday condemning Israel's judicial authorities for not reining in the genocidal rhetoric coming from Israeli government officials. For the first time that we can remember, the explicit calls to commit atrocious crimes, as stated against millions of civilians, have turned into a legitimate and regular part of Israeli discourse, they wrote. Today, calls of these types are a matter of everyday life in Israel. The reason I wanted to share that with you is we've been having conversations about some experts are saying what's happening in Gaza is genocide. Others are saying there's certainly genocidal intent, but it's not genocide, it's ethnic cleansing. We've been talking about what's it mean to prevent genocide before it happens. No matter what you call it, there are massive killings that have been going on. Bombing, the ground incursion. And I think what it's really, really important for us to understand, and this is not reported widely in the news and in the media in the United States, even in the left news, let alone on Fox News or in conservative news outlets, the verbiage coming from leaders from Israel in large part is talking about eradication. It's talking about complete destruction. The words that I just talked about, I just don't want us to miss that there is this intentionality of language that is genocidal language. It is the language of destroying a people group. And so it is desperate. The times are desperate that we continue to call for a ceasefire, that we pray for it, that we work towards it. This is not political. This is about people. So I wanted to start with that desperate need in the update tonight. I also wanted to give an update. This is also a detailed point, but the Israeli defense minister outlined a new phase in the Gaza war. This is Gallant, the defense minister, Yoav Gallant. He was talking about the northern region of the Gaza Strip. He said, we're going to have a new combat approach. And then he described it, and he said it will include raids, demolitions of tunnels, air and ground strikes, and special forces operations. So I think what I saw missing there was the presence of a number of troops on the ground, perhaps, but everything else kind of sounds the same. And as we've been hearing pressure from the US to shift to the next phase of the war, the death toll daily continues to be 100 or more Palestinians every day in the Gaza Strip. In the south, where most of the 2.3 million of the population are living, many in tents and shelters, the operation will continue, this is still Gallant, to try to eliminate Hamas leaders and rescue hostages. He said there's no promises to stop bombing civilian areas and to stop the disproportionate effects on civilians in their military tactical strategy. And he promised, quote, it will continue as long as necessary, end quote. Gallant said that after the war, Hamas would no longer control Gaza. Israel reserves its operational freedom of action. He said there would be no Israeli civilian presence. Remember, that is different than what we've been hearing from Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, but that Palestinian bodies would be in charge of the enclave. He said there would be no hostile actions or threats against the state of Israel. Israeli officials also want a Palestinian entity to be in charge of running civilian affairs, but with very specific conditions in the Gaza Strip. The conditions are that there would be no hostile activities towards Israel, and they would not act against it in any way, shape, or form. And that was not defined in more detail. Gallant repeated there's no place for Hamas in a Gaza post-war, and several Israeli officials, including far-right Finance Minister Smotrich, have also said Israel will permanently control the Gaza Strip. So we're getting lots of mixed messages from Israeli officials. Gallant specified that Israel would have the complete freedom to have military operations in Gaza, which is what we're seeing in the West Bank right now. You'll recall that the majority of West Bank deaths since October 7th have been because of Israeli incursions, and more than half of the deaths have been where there are no weapons at all from Palestinians, but they're rather Israeli military raids. There will be a multinational task force. This is still Gallant's plan. So this is a part of the so-called restructuring, where a task force would include Western and Arab nations that would govern the border area. Israel wants to lead the force and wants it to be in charge of restructuring and redeveloping the Gaza Strip. Egypt, Israel, and the US would work together to guarantee tight supervision of the border. So that is all a part of the plan. Moving on to other issues, last night around 5 p.m., the Washington Post reported that the United States struck Baghdad, which rose the possibilities of a wider regional war. So Iraq responded and said that the strike violated agreements between Baghdad and Washington. The Pentagon said the strike was necessary and proportionate. The airstrike in Baghdad on Thursday killed an Iran-linked militia commander and risked accelerating the regional fallout from Washington's support of Israel's military operation in Gaza, even as the Biden administration scrambled to contain the bloodshed. So that was a part of the summary of that report. There are currently about 2,500 U.S. personnel in Iraq, and they're there to prevent a resurgence, presumably of the Islamic State terrorist network. Again, that's a direct quote. About 900 are spread across the several outposts in Syria. The United States says it's working hard to prevent a war in Gaza. We have a little bit of a different perspective in that regard, but according to the Washington Post, it provides local militia groups fresh incentive to try to dislodge U.S.-led coalition troops. In other words, Baghdad is so upset about this attack that it is very possible that Iraq will decide that the personnel from the United States who still remain in Iraq have to be displaced and shouldn't be there any longer. It's important to note that since October 17th, the U.S. has attacked at least 115 times, either one-way attack drones, rockets, or otherwise. I don't know if those are all in Iraq, but I think that that's Iran-backed militias. So after a militia attack in northern Iraq left a U.S. service member in critical condition, the Pentagon launched retaliatory strikes and said that they killed a number of militants. Iraqi Prime Minister al-Sudani, who last year backed the need for U.S. troops in Iraq, said that the U.S. retaliation killed an Iraqi service member and injured 18 people, including civilians. So that just happened last night. There's pressure from Iraqi officials to take decisive steps to end the presence of the United States in Iraq, and specifically the Baghdad area. I wanted to close tonight just by reading some words from the head of a development office in Gaza, just to give you an idea of a little bit of what life's like there. He says, sorry, I can't help. Since the beginning of the war against Gaza, I've been inundated with pleas for assistance from various individuals, organizations, and groups. It's become routine for me and for my family. In the initial weeks of the ongoing war, whose clear characterization as genocide or massacre, I managed to explain efforts and to offer help to some internally displaced families. However, in recent weeks, the situation has worsened. With families being deported once again, left without shelter, the volume of appeals for tents and bedding has surged, leaving many desperate and unsure of where to turn. Despite my attempts to assist earlier, I'm avoiding calls and I'm yearning for communication blackouts. Even going to work has become challenging as I encounter people seeking aid and assistance every day. Unfortunately, our distribution center can't transform into a registration point, and our resources are not sufficient to help everyone. Our aid, although well-intentioned, feels like a drop in the ocean. People, despite their dignity, plead for basic items like a blanket, a tent, or maybe just a food parcel. It's disheartening to deny so many requests. A patient that has cancer comes in need of a mattress, and our supplies are scarce. I frequently find myself yearning to offer solace through a hug or shared tears, but more often than not, I'm compelled to reiterate, I apologize. I can't offer the assistance that you so desperately need. And I wonder if admitting my own needs for what they are asking for, if that provides them any comfort. As those seeking aid turn away, it is evident that they never want to encounter me again, as my presence simply symbolizes humanity's failure. With that, I would invite you, if there's any possibility for you to join us. I will be out of town traveling, working on bringing peace, but I invite you to consider joining us in Washington, D.C. On January 13th. It is a day of action calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Many from Churches for Middle East Peace and from many, many, many other organizations are going to join a gathering at 1 o'clock on the Mall, marching for peace in Gaza. And Churches for Middle East Peace and many other Christian groups are going to have a prayer vigil in Washington, D.C. at 4 o'clock on that day. So the 13th of January, if you're available to come to the city to call for a ceasefire, we would invite you to join us.